I stepped off voluntarily, dusted my hands, and watched everything burn from the bottom. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning my daughter told me to get lost at her own wedding, and smiled while doing it. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Cedar Falls, Ohio. The Hartwell Estate on Briarwood Lane, a venue that cost me personally $42,000. A number burned into my memory because I signed that check with my own hand, and a quiet kind of pride that only fathers understand. I'd driven in from my place on the east side, the modest craftsman I'd lived in for 19 years, the same house where Grace Garcia, my daughter, 26 years old and stubborn as a cast-iron skillet, grew up drawing wedding dresses on notebook paper. The same house where I'd told her, at 17, that whoever she married better be worth a damn. Sean Cooper seemed worth a damn, 30 years old. Financial analyst, broad shoulders, firm handshake, decent taste in bourbon. He looked me in the eye when he talked. I respected that. I should have looked closer, but that's context. Here's the moment. I pulled into the Hartwell estate dressed in the charcoal suit Grace had helped me pick out at a menswear shop downtown, back in March. She'd straightened my tie in the dressing room mirror and said, "Dad, you're going to embarrass me by looking too good." I'd kept that close. I walked toward the bridal suite entrance, white double doors, ivy climbing the stone, the whole fairy tale, and I could hear voices inside, women laughing, music, the specific chaos of bridesmaids in a room built for half as many. I knocked twice. The laughter stopped. The door opened. Grace stood there in her dress, ivory off-shoulder, exactly what she'd shown me pictures of for months. She looked beautiful. She looked exactly like her mother. And then her expression did something I'd never seen it do before. It closed. Not dramatically. Not like a slap. More like a window being quietly shut from the inside. "Hey, sweetheart." I smiled. You weren't invited to this part." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Grace, what are you?" "Dad." She stepped slightly into the doorframe. Behind her, the room had gone completely silent. 8 women suddenly very interested in their bouquets. "I'm sorry, but you weren't invited. Go away." Said the way you'd say them to a stranger. Said the way you'd say them to someone you'd already decided wasn't worth softening the blow for. I stood there for 4 full seconds. I counted them somehow, even in that moment. She knows. She has to know. But what does she know? And how long has she known? "Okay," I said. "That's all." "Okay." I turned around, walked back down the ivy-covered path, got in my truck, and sat in the parking lot of the estate I'd paid for, in the suit my daughter helped me choose, and stared at the steering wheel like it owed me an explanation. Here's what most men would have done. Called, texted, begged someone inside to pass a message. Made a scene, made it about their feelings. I'm not most men. I opened my banking app and canceled every outstanding payment tied to this wedding. $42,000 for the venue, $11,000 to the caterer, the florist, the DJ, the photographer, every line item I'd approved over 7 months of planning, $71,000. Gone in about 9 minutes, I didn't feel powerful doing it. I want to be honest about that. I felt like a man confirming what he already suspected, that whatever was happening today had nothing to do with money, and never had. She hired someone. I don't know how I know that. I just know. Let me back up, because for this to make sense, you need to understand what the 6 weeks leading up to this morning actually looked like. It started small, the kind of small that only registers in hindsight. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize that disconnected when I called back. A neighbor mentioning casually that a gray sedan had been parked outside my house 2 Tuesdays in a row. "Probably nothing," he said. I agreed. At the time, then Grace started calling with different questions. Not the usual, "How are you, Dad? Did you eat? Are you coming early Saturday?" These were questions about her mother, about the years before she was born, about a town called Reedsville that I hadn't heard anyone say out loud in 23 years. "Why Reedsville?" I asked. "I was just looking at old photos," she said. "Too fast. Found some stuff in a box." I didn't push, didn't confirm, didn't deny. I am, after all, a man with things in boxes I'd prefer stayed there. Then an old friend told me someone had called him. Said they were doing a routine background check. Asked some questions about me. Specific questions. Where was Mason in the summer of 2001? Did he ever mention a woman named? The call had dropped before he caught the name. Sure it did. I'd started paying real attention after that, and what I found when I paid attention was the outline of something I'd spent 26 years making sure no one could find. Not a crime. I need to be clear about that. But the kind of secret that once it surfaces doesn't just change how people see you, it changes how they see everything. Every memory, every sacrifice, every moment they thought they understood. It rewrites the whole story backwards. The kind of secret that explains why a daughter might look her father in the eye on her wedding day and say go away, just to see what he'd do. She wanted to know if I'd fight. I didn't fight, and that told her everything. I was still sitting in that parking lot, engine off, jacket getting wrinkled, when my phone buzzed. Not Grace, not Sean, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go. Then something, instinct, dread, 23 years of living carefully, made me open it. A text. 7 words. She knows about Reedsville. We need to talk. I read it 3 times. Then I started the truck, pulled out of the Hartwell estate, and drove east on Briarwood Lane. Away from the flowers, away from the music, away from $79,000 of fairy tale I'd just reduced to ash. And for the first time in 23 years, I let myself think about Reedsville. All of it. I didn't know who sent that message. I didn't know yet that finding out would cost me something far worse than a canceled wedding. But I was already driving toward it. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. It's the moment you realize someone else has been keeping you, watching, waiting, collecting pieces of a puzzle you thought you'd burned years ago. That's the moment the ground shifts. That's the moment you stop being the man who knows everything and become the man who knows nothing at all. I was 20 minutes east of the Hartwell estate when I pulled into the parking lot of a diner called Heller's on Route 9, the kind of place that's been there since 1974 and will outlast us all. Cracked vinyl booths, coffee that tastes like ambition and disappointment in equal measure. I'd eaten here 100 times. It felt like neutral ground. I needed neutral ground. I ordered coffee, took the booth in the back corner facing the door, a habit I'd developed a long time ago and never explained to anyone. And I read that text again. She knows about Reedsville. We need to talk. No context. The number was a 614 area code, Columbus. Nobody I had saved, nobody I'd spoken to recently. But the word Reedsville wasn't something a stranger stumbled onto. That word was buried under 2 decades of deliberate silence. Whoever sent this had done real work to find it. I typed back 2 words. Who's this? The reply came in under a minute. Someone who was there. Oh, that narrows it down in ways I really don't appreciate. I put the phone face down on the table and drank my coffee and thought about how, 23 years ago, I was a completely different version of Mason Foster. Younger, stupider, in love with a woman who wasn't Grace's mother, in a town I had no business being in, making a decision I told myself at the time was the only option available. I still don't know if I was right about that. What I know is that Grace's mother, Diane, never knew. We met a year after Reedsville, married 2 years later. She passed when Grace was 11, a fact that still sits in my chest, like a stone that never quite dissolved. Diane never knew, because I never told her. And I never told Grace because some doors, once you weld them shut, you leave them shut. Apparently Grace had found herself a blowtorch. My phone buzzed again. Same number. I'm at Heller's Diner, Route 9, blue jacket, window seat. I looked up slowly. Across the diner, 3 booths down, a woman sat with her hands wrapped around a mug. Late 50s. Silver hair cut short. Blue jacket, just like she said. She was already looking at me with the calm expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. I recognized her. Not immediately. The way you recognize a song from the first 3 notes, something in the body before the brain catches up. Charlotte Pruitt. Or she used to be. Different last name now, probably. Different life. But those eyes, steady, a little sad, the eyes of a woman who'd seen something she couldn't unsee, those hadn't changed at all. I picked up my coffee, walked over, and sat down across from her without being invited. Charlotte. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. You look older. You look like someone who's been following my daughter around. She didn't flinch. I wasn't following her. She found me. People don't just find you, Charlotte. Not after 23 years. Not in connection with a town nobody talks about. Your daughter is not just people, she said, and something in her tone made me set my coffee down carefully. She's been looking for 8 months. She hired an investigator out of Columbus. Good one, too. He found me in about 6 weeks. 8 months. Grace had been doing this for 8 months, while calling me every Sunday, while sending me photos of centerpiece options and asking whether I preferred salmon or chicken at the reception. While letting me pay for all of it, she'd been building a case against me while I was paying for her flowers. What did you tell her? I asked. Charlotte looked at her mug. Not everything. Not yet. What does not yet mean? It means I wanted to talk to you first. She finally looked up. I thought you deserved that much. That's generous, I said, given the circumstances. Don't do that, she said, and there was a quiet sharpness in it. Don't get sarcastic with me, Mason. I've carried this a lot longer than you have, and I carried it alone, so you don't get to be flippant right now. Tell me what she knows. Charlotte wrapped both hands tighter around her mug. She knows you were in Reedsville the summer of 2001. She knows you weren't there alone. She knows something happened that you've never talked about. She paused. She doesn't know about the baby. The diner noise, clinking plates, murmured conversations, the cook calling out an order, suddenly felt very far away. I started. Mason. I stopped. I was there. She said quietly. Don't. Here's the thing about the summer of 2001 that I have never said out loud to a single living person. Charlotte Pruitt and I were together for 4 months. Real together, not casual. I was 29 between jobs, doing consulting work that took me through a string of small Ohio towns. Reedsville was supposed to be a 2-week stop. It turned into 4 months, because of her. When she told me she was pregnant, I did not handle it well. That's the sanitized version. The honest version is that I panicked in a way that revealed exactly who I was at 29, which was a man who was not ready to be anyone's father, and was too cowardly to admit it out loud. I left. I told myself she'd be fine. I told myself I'd reach out. I never did. What I didn't know, what I had spent 23 years not knowing, or maybe choosing not to find out, was what happened after. And now I was about to find out. What happened, Charlotte? She said it plainly, the way people say things they've made peace with through sheer repetition. So there's no child out there, if that's what you're bracing for. That's not the secret. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since she said the word baby. Then what is? The secret, she said, is that Grace knows you left. She knows you were with someone, that something happened, and that you ran. She doesn't have all the details, but she has enough. Charlotte met my eyes. She wanted to know what kind of man her father really is, whether the version of you she grew up with is real, or a performance. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. A performance. 26 years of Saturday morning pancakes and school pickups, and sitting in the front row of every recital and driving 11 hours round trip when she had her appendix out at a college 3 states away. And my daughter had looked at all of it and wondered if any of it was real. That landed somewhere deep, somewhere that had nothing to do with Reedsville. She set me up this morning, I said, not a question. Yes, the go away, the door in my face, on her wedding day. I laughed, short, humorless. She wanted to see if I'd fight, and you canceled the payments instead, Charlotte said. There was no judgment in it, just fact. I'm guessing that wasn't the response she was hoping for. I don't perform for tests, Charlotte. I know that. She looked at me carefully, but she doesn't. Not yet. And right now, she's inside that estate thinking her father just proved her worst theory right, that when things get hard, Mason Foster gets in his truck and drives away. My phone was already lighting up on the table between us. I didn't have to look to know. I looked anyway. 12 missed calls. 10 from a number I didn't know. The wedding coordinator probably, having a complete professional meltdown over my canceled payments. 1 from Sean Cooper, which surprised me, and 1 from Grace. No voicemail, just the call, sitting there in the log like a question mark. She called. After everything, the dress, the doorway, the 3 words, she called, which meant the test wasn't over. I have to go back, I said. Charlotte nodded slowly. I know. Will you come? She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face, old and complicated and not entirely resolved. There are things she's going to need to hear from both of us, she said finally. Things that don't make sense without the full picture. That's not a yes. That's an I'll follow you. I left cash on the table, enough for both our coffees and then some, and stood up. Through the diner window, I could see my truck in the lot, the Cedar Falls skyline low and gray in the late morning. Clouds stacking up the way they do in Ohio before everything opens up and soaks you. I didn't know yet what Grace was going to say when she saw me walk back through those doors. I didn't know yet that Sean Cooper's phone call had nothing to do with the wedding. And I didn't know yet that the investigator Grace had hired hadn't just dug up Reedsville. He'd found something else. Something even I didn't know existed. I walked out of Heller's Diner and drove west on Route 9, back toward Briarwood Lane, back toward the Hartwell estate, back toward my daughter. This time, I wasn't walking away. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. There's no manual for it, no script. You just put one foot in front of the other and hope that whatever's waiting on the other side of the door has enough grace left in it to let you speak before it finishes deciding who you are. I pulled back into the Hartwell estate at 11:30. The parking lot was tense in that specific way that only happens when expensive plans are quietly falling apart. The wedding coordinator, a sharp woman in a gray blazer, was standing near the entrance with her phone pressed to her ear and the expression of someone mentally updating their resume. Two catering staff leaned against a van looking confused. A florist was sitting on the hood of her car scrolling through her phone with the dead eyes of a woman who'd seen a wire transfer disappear before. Nobody stopped me walking in. Amazing what confidence does. Walk like you own the place, especially when you've technically paid for most of it. Charlotte pulled in behind me. I didn't wait for her. I walked straight through the main entrance, down the corridor lined with white roses and soft lighting, past a string quartet that had stopped playing and was now just sitting there holding instruments like very expensive props, and I pushed open the door to the east wing where the bridal suite was. The hallway outside was empty now. The chaos of earlier had settled into something quieter and worse, the silence of people waiting for something to break. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately, like someone had been standing on the other side of it. It wasn't Grace. It was Sean. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't expected. Not anger, not the defensive posture of a groom whose wedding I'd just financially detonated. He looked. And I say this as a man who has worn this exact face. Relieved. Mr. Foster. He exhaled. Thank God. Why are you answering the bridal suite door? Because Grace locked herself in the bathroom 20 minutes ago and won't come out, he said, stepping aside to let me in. And because I called you because I didn't know what else to do. I walked in. The room was emptied out. Bridesmaids gone, flowers slightly wilted from the heat of too many people, the whole fairy tale looking a little tired now. 2 champagne flutes still sat on the vanity, one untouched. From behind the closed bathroom door, silence. I looked at Sean. How much do you know? He ran a hand through his hair. Enough. She told me about the investigator 2 months ago, about Reedsville, about what she was trying to find out. He paused. I told her she should just talk to you. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to test. I know, he said quietly. And I told her that was a mistake, for whatever that's worth. It was worth something. I didn't tell him that, but it was. I walked to the bathroom door and stood in front of it for a moment. 26 years of knowing this person. Every version of her, the toddler who called spaghetti paschetti, the teenager who cried in the car after her first heartbreak and made me promise not to tell anyone she cried. The young woman who called me from college at 2 a.m. not because anything was wrong, but because she just felt like talking, all of it compressed into this one closed door. I knocked, twice, same as the bridal suite door that morning, felt like a year ago. Nothing. Grace. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I came back. Silence. I know that's not enough. I know this morning probably looked exactly like every worst thing you've been thinking about me. I put one hand flat against the door, not dramatic, just there. But I came back, and I brought someone with me who you need to meet, and I think it's time we stop testing each other and just said the actual words out loud. A long pause. Then the click of the lock. The door opened, and there was my daughter sitting on the edge of the bathtub in her wedding dress. Ivory, off-shoulder, $42,000 fairy tale, with mascara she'd clearly tried to fix and hadn't quite managed. and the expression of someone who had been bracing for a version of this conversation for 8 months and was now suddenly not sure they were ready. She looked so much like her mother it physically hurt. I sat down on the closed toilet lid across from her, because there was nowhere else to sit, and because this wasn't a conversation you had standing up. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You hired someone," I said. "Yeah, while we were picking centerpieces." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or the specific exhaustion of carrying a secret while pretending you're not. "Dad, I'm not angry, Grace." And I meant it. "I'm not angry, I want to understand what you were looking for. In your own words, not through a report." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of heels on hardwood. Charlotte, waiting in the main room with Sean. The whole building felt like it was holding its breath. "I found a box," Grace said finally. "Mom's box. The one in the top of the hall closet that you always said was just old paperwork. Of course, Diane. Even gone, protecting things she hadn't known she was protecting." "There were letters," Grace continued. "Not from Mom. From you, to someone. Unsent, like you wrote them and then never mailed them. They were dated 2001. She looked at her hands. They were sad, Dad. Really sad. And guilty. And I didn't understand why, so I started trying to find out. Unsent letters. I had forgotten about those letters. I had forgotten, and Diane had apparently found them and kept them and said absolutely nothing, which told me more about the woman I married than anything else ever could. "Why didn't you just ask me?" I said, gently. No accusation in it. She looked up. "Because I was scared of what you'd say. And the test this morning." Her jaw tightened. "I needed to know if you'd fight. If you'd push back, demand an explanation, refuse to just walk away, because the man in those letters was someone who walked away from something hard, and I needed to know if that was still you. And when I canceled the payments, I thought," her voice cracked. She steadied it. "I thought I had my answer." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Grace, I canceled the payments because I knew something was happening that I didn't understand yet, and the only language I had in that moment was the one that said, 'Nothing continues until we're honest.' That wasn't me walking away. That was me stopping the clock." She stared at me. "That's a very fine distinction, Dad." "I know." I almost smiled. "I came back, though." "You came back," she repeated quietly, like she was checking whether it was real. "And I brought someone." I walked her out of the bathroom. Sean was standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, the posture of a good man staying out of something that wasn't his to fix. Charlotte was near the door, blue jacket, hands clasped, carrying 23 years of her own complicated feelings into a room that already had plenty. Grace stopped when she saw her. She recognized her from the investigation, clearly. The slight widening of her eyes gave it away. "This is Charlotte Pruitt," I said. "She's from Reedsville, and she's going to help me explain something I should have explained a long time ago." We talked for 40 minutes. I told Grace about 2001, about Charlotte, about the 4 months I spent in a town I had no business staying in, and the decision I made to leave that I had never fully forgiven myself for. Charlotte filled in the parts I hadn't known, the loss, the months after, the way she'd eventually rebuilt and moved forward, and made a life that was genuinely good, genuinely hers. "I'm not here to indict your father," Charlotte said at one point, looking directly at Grace. "I want you to understand that. I made peace with what happened a long time ago. I came here because he deserved to tell you himself, with the full picture, not the half version your investigator found." Grace listened to all of it without interrupting once, which, if you know Grace Garcia, is its own kind of extraordinary. When we finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "So the secret," Grace said slowly, "is that you made a mistake, that you were young and scared, and you ran, and you've been ashamed of it ever since." "That's most of it," I said. "And the man who did that," she looked at me carefully, "you think that's still who you are?" "No." I didn't hesitate, but I understand why you needed to check. Her eyes went bright. She blinked it back, stubborn just like always. "I'm sorry about the door," she said quietly. "This morning. The way I said it. I'm sorry it took me 23 years to deserve better than a test." She laughed, short, wet, real. The first real thing I'd heard all morning. Sean moved from the window then, came and stood beside her, put a hand on her back in the quiet way of someone who knew exactly when to show up and exactly how much space to take. I noted that. Filed it away. Good man. So, Grace said, wiping the corner of her eye with a composure that would have made her mother proud. You canceled $70,000 worth of payments this morning. I did. Can you uncancel them? I pulled out my phone, already working on it. The wedding was 2 hours and 14 minutes late. The coordinator aged visibly. The caterer had a brief emotional moment near the appetizers. The string quartet played the same 3 pieces 4 times each, and were extremely professional about it. But Grace Garcia walked down the aisle in the Hartwell estate on Briarwood Lane with her father's arm in hers, in a dress that was everything she'd drawn on notebook paper as a little girl, and she married Sean Cooper in front of everyone who mattered. Charlotte sat in the 3rd row. She cried a little. I didn't ask about it, and she didn't explain, and that felt exactly right. At the reception, Grace found me at my table during the first song break. She sat down, stole a piece of bread from my plate without asking, a habit that started when she was 4, and apparently had no expiration date, and looked at me sideways. Dad, the next time I give you a test, there won't be a next time, I said, because the next time you have a question about who I am, you're going to ask me, out loud, like a person. She was quiet for a second. Okay, she said. Deal. She leaned over and put her head on my shoulder for exactly 3 seconds, the same way she had when she was small, when the world was too loud and she needed somewhere to put it for a moment. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked back to her husband. And I sat there in a room I'd almost burned to the ground and thought, some things are worth coming back for. Most things, actually. If you're brave enough to turn the truck around. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.